English translation. 849th Contact Monday, the 12th of June 2023, 8:16 HRS.
Here I am again, greetings, dear friend.
Greetings and welcome also, Quetzal. Today I have quite a lot to discuss, but first I would like to know what you have to report. Namely, if you know anything regarding the corona rampantly spreading disease that, against all our caution, was brought in here at our passive General Assembly, apparently by a person who did not know he was corona infected. It is simply impossible that we have acted wrongly, just as it is certain that all passive members have really kept to the rule, as Ptaah advised. So namely that really only passive members who were free of corona signed up. The fact that you then shouted out so loudly because Ptaah and I were thoughtlessly accused of irresponsibility was unfortunately such that it could also be heard outside my office. It was then also actually the case, because your loud talking was heard by Michael Fives and Karin W, who later spoke to me about it and asked me why it was that your loud talking was overheard. This is regrettable, but it happened because Ptaah and you were thoughtlessly and unfairly accused of being irresponsible. A schoolboy-like, unjustified, and absolutely unthinking accusation was made, which had no justification whatsoever, because your behavior was correct in every process, just as Ptaah's clarifications were correct in every process. The fact that you allowed and advised the removal of the respirators in the center was absolutely justified, proper, and therefore corresponded to safety. However, contrary to this, a person appeared who was infected with the coronavirus but knew nothing about this infection. She could not have known this either, because this led back to an infection that occurred on the journey to the center and corresponded to a mutation that took effect very quickly with a short incubation period and was also transmitted to other persons. Consequently, not only various persons who were at the center and at the inn were infected, but also persons who almost came into contact with the infected person on the journey here and back and fell ill with regard to their weak immune system. Persons with a good and strong immune system remained unaffected by the virus, so that only those were infected whose immune system was not able to provide them with sufficient resistance, and consequently they also fell ill with the corona disease very unusually quickly.
Something should first be clarified clearly and correctly before unproven and incorrect accusations are made, which moreover in this case turned out to be quite vicious. Moreover, such a contrary and therefore incorrect behavior cannot be excused and justified by attacking you and Ptaah, because that is exactly what has been and continues to be done unjustifiably, as we have ascertained in our clarifications and continue to ascertain. All of this is based on choleric self-importance, intransigence, and ignorance of all decency and every process of reason, as well as misjudgment, as well as very damaging, negative and personal behavior, bossiness, intransigence, and absolute choleric self-importance. Everything of correct behavior has been and continues to be ignored. What is thought or done of the right and concerning the personal sphere of other human beings, whereby there is also an unconditional wrong behavior, which, however, cannot be recognized due to choleric tendency. It would, however, be very pleasing if this could be thought about and talked about in peace, but according to our clarifications, this obviously cannot be made possible because the openly recognizable choleric nature makes this impossible.
What you say probably falls on the ground of quite aggressive backtalk and incomprehension, as well as the conceit of aggressiveness and untruthfulness. But that is unfortunately the case with many human beings on Earth. Consequently, they immediately become combative when they are told the truth.
This is indeed the case, and it will also be the case with regard to the future, when, as I have been instructed to explain to the experts of Europe's forest and tree and plant experts, mixed forests with trees and bushes, as well as plants and herbs of all kinds, are to be established in the future. It goes without saying that both native species, such as particularly suitable tree species, shrubs, and bushes, and thus also plants of foreign origin, that is to say, neophytes that already thrive in the European climate, as well as future neophytes are to be planted, which are to find a good place in Europe's nature. Excluded from this are very, very few plants that have a proliferative characteristic and should be avoided. In this respect, however, many of the lists I am most familiar with, which are kept in stupid simplicity and falsehood, are incompatible with the truth and reality. This is because the many plants named as invasive neophytes are in fact not invasive, meaning invading, in the process that they can usually be misconstrued as rampant. The lists of these invasive neophytes in this misunderstanding are falsely kept by the nature conservation associations and their members as rampant, as well as foreign invaders, and not native. Consequently, they have no idea whatsoever that all plants of any kind that effectively grow and thrive are native. This is because it grew and flourished here in much earlier times, before it was wiped out by an icy climate change, and consequently did not grow again, but grows and flourishes again when it is now replanted in the temperate climate that has prevailed for thousands of years. The members of the nature conservation associations are not aware of this fact, and are sometimes even fanatical representatives of their ignorance, which is why they often also fall prey to the radicalism of complete eradication with regard to neophytic plants that were once native here in Europe, for example, and can now regain a foothold in the prevailing climate and be reintroduced.
That in the conservation fanatic's ear, my friend. But whether that can penetrate their ears and muddled brain and mind and reason, that is questionable.
That is indeed questionable. Besides, I have noticed that many fanatics are to be found in these nature conservation associations, and moreover show especially choleric traits, and are also of this nature in character. But if you will allow me, I would like to recall what you recently explained to me about cholerics when we had our private conversation elsewhere on this subject, which I recorded because I found your explanation very good. Maybe you can also explain a little bit more about that?
Of course I can, but only off the cuff, because my explanation will probably not serve as a treatise then. It will also take some time, because everything should be understandable. But first I would like to know when it can actually be expected, when it will happen, that the extremely rare material will be found on Earth that has superconductivity, so to speak, superconductor matter or superconductive matter or something like that. This had come from the depths of space in early times, and had been important in the formation of the Sun, and thus of the solar system, as Svath explained to me towards the end of the 1940s. This natural material, which, as he said at the time, had a superconducting energy, was still very rarely stored in some places deep in the Earth, but was just as rarely drifted through real-world space as small fragments or larger asteroids. And he really meant world space, not the space of the solar system, because far beyond the last planet of the solar system, the space of the world begins, or space, as they say. He also spoke of the fact that such material would very rarely reach the solar system on its drift, and then fall to Earth as asteroids, so to speak, or as so-called shooting stars, and also other materials that were still absolutely strange and unknown to the scientists of the Earthlings. So it would also be in the future, which would lead to unreal speculations.
I am not aware of that, and I have also never dealt with such things.
Well then, no. So therefore an intermediate question or intermediate matter. What do you think about the machinations of the governments, which in terms of all reason are misplaced and completely insane, and obviously as a result of the demonstrations of the environmentalists, are now going crazy and want to remodel everything in terms of means of transport, heating and electricity, etc. Accordingly, they are making insane and confused decisions and ordering measures that will do more harm than good, especially here in Europe.
Sheer stupidity, because this will not end the problem of the all-round rampant destruction of the planet, of all ecosystems, of all nature and its fauna and flora, as well as of the atmosphere. Only a radical reduction of the horrendous mass of Earth humans, worldwide without ifs and buts, and below 1 billion human beings, can bring an end to all destruction and a future. This would have to be the important strict resolution and implementation order by all leaders of all states, for this measure alone is only future proof for the continued existence of the humanity of this world. And only through this can also the threatening disaster be averted and ended, which is in the offing through artificial intelligence, which is already much further advanced in its development than the peoples of Earth are informed about and are in danger of becoming in the future.
I am not going to, that in the retrieval of our conversation. But it is time now, I think, that I show you what I received from Christian Still by email when you were already gone, and explain that you wanted to follow up the matter of the corona outbreak here in Schmidruti.
Then let's hear what you have to say about the email, etc. But what we found out, which was very unpleasant, was what I have already explained, that a male person, named, came here unexpectedly to the center, who had been infected with the coronavirus on the journey here. However, she did not know this herself, as I have already said, and she also did not show any health symptoms at first, but only much later when she returned home, because that was when she began to show symptoms of illness, after which it was determined at home that a corona infection was present.
Exactly, I know that because Christian beamed me the email here which says exactly what you just said. But you were already gone. The email confirms what you are saying, which is that neither Ptaah nor I did anything wrong, nor did anyone else from the core group. So see this email here, which clearly states that Ptaah and I were thus thoughtlessly and falsely innocently accused of irresponsibility.
And forwarded message. Subject, COVID date. 2. The 6th of June, 2023, 12 hours, 9 minutes and 50 seconds plus 0700. From 2. At Figu.
Dear Christian, when I was at the center, I had a bit of congestion, nothing serious. I assumed it was from the change in climate. After I left for home, however, it started to get worse. When I finally got home, my wife suggested that I take a COVID test, and I tested positive. I sincerely apologize if I caused anyone at the center to become ill due to my negligence. I should have worn a mask at the first sign of a problem, but I often have congestion, and it just didn't occur to me that it might be something serious. Please convey my apologies to anyone who may have become ill due to my irresponsibility. Kind regards. Dear Billy, the new Figu member apologizes on behalf of all Americans for the disrespectful behavior. On behalf of all Americans, I would like to apologize to Harold Billy Meyer and the Pleyarans for the insane claims and disrespect shown. Life happens, and too bad couldn't grasp that. Please tell Billy that we apologize for behavior and that he should not give up on us. Salome is the one Bernadette so rudely rejected. He lives in and which I had told you about.
Send securely with forwarded message from at Gmail. Com date. On Saturday, the 10th of June, 2023 at 1:20 HRS.
On behalf of all Americans, I would like to apologize to the Harold Billy Meyer and the Pleyarans for insane claims and the disrespect he showed. Life happens, and too bad he couldn't grasp that. Please tell Billy we're sorry for his behavior and not to give up on us. Salome, kind regards, Michael Phi.
Then finally this email.
Dear Billy and Michael, the recent contact note hardly went unnoticed by the human beings in the Figu community. Michael V asked me to say a few words. It kept me awake last night, so I have come to the conclusion to remain neutral as best I can and to express the wish that everything returns to normal. I lack the necessary facts to come to a truly logical conclusion. This email is just my opinion, as I have no illusions that I could tell any of you anything that you don't already know much better than I do. The following are my findings, the lessons I have learned from all this. 1. In my opinion, Michael Horn's angry and frustrated email is a result of his loss of self-control, most likely because he and his wife were accidentally exposed to corona disease, which can be very dangerous in old age. Obvious in his email is a cascade of frustrations and emotions that could have been avoided if Michael had taken the time to calm down, think calmly and logically, and take a deep breath. This would have prevented the angry and attacking email to Billy. I can understand Billy's thoughts and feelings about this email, and Quetzal's protective reaction to his friend Billy. 2. Due to circumstances, I could not attend the meeting myself. but even if Billy and the Pleiarans tell the human beings that masks are unnecessary, the human beings in general could really make their own decision whether to accept or reject this advice, because the human beings trust the behavior of the group more than their own thoughts. I can only speak for Earth humans, but I know firsthand that Earthlings don't like to fall out of step with the group. I think the teaching here is to learn self-knowledge, self-strength, and self-control. 3. A brief quotation from Contact Report 847. Both Billy and Quetzal assumed that the meetings of passive members could take place without masks, provided that the rule that only registered persons attend is observed. This makes it clear that it is the responsibility of the registered persons to be tested for acute coronavirus infection before attending, which was obviously not done by one or more members. This is something neither Billy nor the Pleiarans had any control over. There is a saying in Holland, and also in other countries, that acceptance is the mother of all of ups, so in hindsight, it would have been better to err on the side of caution and follow all the required corona rules. That's it. I sincerely hope that this matter is resolved in a reasonable process, as I am sure you both are capable of doing so. You are an inspiration to me. Thank you both from the bottom of my heart for all you have done. I cannot express enough how honored I am to have found the teaching of creation energy and all the wisdom it contains. I am eternally grateful to Billy, Figu, and Michael V, and all the others. Love and Salome.
Well, I have nothing further to say on all this, regarding the ill-considered and unjustified insinuation of alleged irresponsibility thrown at Ptaah and me. Nor am I vindictive or vindictive. It is simply unfortunate that human beings immediately create bad blood in themselves at every ambiguous incident, rashly and unrestrainedly fly into a rage, seize on false accusations, and still imagine they are in the right. For me, everything is over and forgotten, so it is not in my mind to say another word about it. But it is worth saying that the wearing of respirators is not as harmless in the long run as it is claimed to be, and is either kept quiet by the medical profession, or, as Ptaah says, is completely unknown to them. He has told me this many times, so I know that such masks are not only useful because they largely keep out germs, such as viruses and other little animals that cause disease. But there are still factors that also bring disadvantages, namely that certain and valuable as well as health-necessary substances or energies of the oxygen, and thus also of the atmosphere, are also retained and filtered out. And as Ptaah explained, it is a given that this creates health vulnerabilities. Consequently, the human being is more susceptible and no longer fully protected by the immune system, because this can be affected by the missing substances or energies in a process that is unknown to the medical profession and researchers, although they want to know everything.
This is correct, but discussing it is not useful. However, as far as such ill-considered reactions and accusations are concerned, which have arisen with regard to the infection with the corona rampantly spreading disease, they are really regrettable and show an intemperance and choleric nature, which should demand so much sense from persons who have fallen prey to it, that they would recognize the personal incorrect behavior themselves, and make an effort to remedy it, instead of feeling unjustly in the right. But exactly this is not done, for human beings who are addicted to this kind are as a rule incapable of wanting to recognize their weakness and the evil of their choleric behavior, and to remedy this. In this connection, you yourself explained the following, which I can reproduce herewith: the lack of insight, self-importance and recognition of the wrong, as well as the willing reflection and the necessary reason and all forms of decency, exceed the capacity of ability in every form, because fundamentally everything is lacking, and the choleric human being is unwilling to work out what is correct with regard to his behavior and to let it flow into his character. The choleric person is, with rare exceptions, unwilling to gain knowledge about himself and his behavior. Consequently, he degrades himself to an incapable of learning. In the choleric person, the whole thing inevitably leads to the fact that a statement or an action of another human being is immediately interpreted as an attack and is not thought about in any process, but is reacted to in a choleric way, and it is not recognized that, for example, a justified rebuke is constructive and groundbreaking in order to create peace within oneself as well as with the environment. But if this is not recognized, then the other human beings are hurt, and the choleric misbehaviors then also do not stand by their misbehavior and do not apologize, because they wrongly feel in the right and justified for their misbehavior and also really mean it. Now it would be good if you explained a bit more about this, though, because I assume you're better at it than I am.
I am not so sure about that because you certainly have more life experience and knowledge than me in that regard. You're much older than me, after all.
With being older, you said what corresponds to the truth, even if the difference is not that big. But with life experience, you are superior to me. Just what you were able to experience and learn with Svath on Earth, I know very well from his annals that you are far superior to me in that respect.
How you see it, that is your business. But if I am to say something about the choleric, then I can only say it in such a way that it comes to my mind at the moment, so everything will not be in order. But listen, choleric is a colloquial term for a type of person who is irascible, all too quick to fly off the handle, and who gets worked up in a matter of seconds over trifles, and becomes quite loud and quick-tempered at the slightest inconvenience.
That sounds like I would also belong to this species. I too got loud when Ptaah and you were insulted after all.
No, that has nothing to do with it, because you defended Ptaah and me against the thoughtless injustice, and that is truly different.
That reassures me because...
No, you don't have to go over the books because defense allows a loud word, as you just did. A loud word is also appropriate and justified when there is stubbornness or bossiness, etc., which usually requires speaking up or even yelling. On the other hand, however, the following must be explained with regard to choleric human beings. If I am to say anything further, namely, choleric comes from the ancient Greek word kol, which translated means bile, which is why choleric people are said to have bile rising up in them, although no human being is an actual choleric or a man, for women can also be choleric and radical. At the same time, choleric fits can have very different forms and causes, although in many cases it is only a matter of trivialities. A choleric human being can not only steal a lot of energy and joy from fellow human beings, or in a relationship and even create enmity, especially also on his own side, because cholerics can be very resentful. At the beginning of a friendship, acquaintance, or close relationship, choleric negative outbursts do not usually occur right away, because interestingly enough, outbursts of anger are held back deliberately so that they do not seem very noticeable or not noticeable at all. Choleric people are often very charismatic persons and know exactly how to present themselves to others, so they can make a strong impression on them. Only gradually do they allow their choleric fits to become noticeable, especially when it comes to love and partnerships, because then cholerics can hold back their cholerism at first, but then gradually and suddenly lose control of their own feelings, unexpectedly quickly and openly bring their choleric nature to the fore, often with suppression, hostility, violence, with torture, beatings and blows. In a close relationship, in a marriage, etc., this can not only become an unbearable burden, but can even lead to murder and manslaughter. Something that is proven time and again and is more widespread than the public assumes, because those who suffer harm, who are truly victims of such choleric fits of their partners, and mostly women, remain silent. They allow themselves to be abused, often for the sake of their children, or because they are afraid of everything becoming known, or because death threats and the like fearfully prevent them from coming out to real friends, or to the police, etc., and seeking advice and help. Already in childhood, for example, injuries, such as those caused by the wrong behavior of parents or other caregivers as well as the environment, may have led to choleric behavior, which has shaped the behavior in adulthood in a choleric way. Therefore, if emotions in a situation become more violent than would be appropriate and correspond to decency, correctness, and justice, then this is very often due to long past experiences and injuries, which are remembered subconsciously and trigger emotions, which often lead to a reaction with surging anger, without the choleric human being knowing why he reacts in such a manner. Cholerics suffer from attention deficit disorder and hyperactivity disorder. Cholerics, both female and male, fly into a rage very quickly and uncontrollably, especially and above all through unpleasant experiences, when they fall into frustration, which happens very often and is triggered when they are rightly or wrongly met with opposition. Anger produces physical reactions and discomfort in them, which brings stress, which release all kinds of hormones, such as adrenaline, cortisone and noradrenaline, as well as testosterone. These are released in increased and abundant amounts. In the whole process, the blood pressure will also rise and the heart rate will increase. The choleric human being is also vindictive, although many of both sexes are embarrassed by their anger shortly after their tantrums, so they may superficially entertain the idea of an excuse me, but usually forget it again. But when they jump the fence and actually apologize, the apologies are or seem somehow hollow and empty, because there is no change in the choleric behavior and the outbursts of anger. Consequently, nothing is learned from it, which makes the choleric traits even more pronounced as they grow older. As a result, it is not uncommon for the choleric person to exacerbate the stresses and strains on other persons in the immediate environment. This is the case when the active choleric behavior learned at a young age cannot be broken down again, whereby the prerequisite for breaking down is that the choleric human being becomes aware of his wrong behavior, and also consciously works on breaking down his temper, until it dissolves into happiness. Cholerics of both sexes suffer from an attention deficit, that is to say a hyperactivity disorder, as well as psychic disorders, but also unconsciously from anxiety states and subconsciously anchored feelings of neglect. Certain forms of autism, etc. can also lead to choleric fits of rage, but cholerics of all types are generally quick-tempered, very unbalanced and hot-tempered. Typical cholerics tend to have sudden and very violent and completely unprovoked outbursts of anger, uncontrollably and in a matter of seconds, that is to say from 0 to 100 within 1 or 2 seconds. Such human beings give free rein to their aggression and rage, and in an uncontrolled state, do not shy away from violence or even murder and manslaughter. If you look at the way choleric people of both sexes work, they unfortunately appear quite unprofessional, unsympathetic and uninterested, because the choleric always breaks through and comes to the fore. In daily life and from a safe distance, choleric outbursts can be quite amusing, that is to say amusing or even refreshing and exciting, but those who have to endure cholerics day after day will probably only find them unbearable. Especially at work, a choleric human being can massively disturb and even ruin the peace. Effectively, a definition of the choleric human being can be created. For example, if you are looking for a definition of the term, you can imagine a passionate, irascible, and irritable human being, and thereby recognize a human being with a choleric disposition, whereby it is best to bear in mind that a choleric human being has typical bad qualities and characteristics, such as 1. Inappropriate words and behavior 2. Dominant and opinionated behavior 3. Loud and violent choleric tendencies 4. Flying off the handle over trifles 5. Easy excitability 6. Sudden, unprovoked, violent, uncontrollable, loud outbursts of rage 7. Very little self-control over one's own feelings 8. Frequent and rapid outbursts 9. Excessive impulsivity 10. Uncontrollable violence 11. Intransigence 12. Bossiness 13. Very quick irritability 14. Small things cause strong emotions 15. Impulsiveness is constantly exaggerated 16. Dominating behavior 17. Readiness to use violence and uncontrollable use of violence 18. Imbalance 19. Resentful for a long time 20. Irascible 21. Unbalanced 22. Quick-tempered. On the contrary, good and valuable qualities are found in choleric human beings, such as the following: 23. Passionate 24. Dynamic 25. Self-initiated 26. Motivated 27. Willingness to perform 28. Strong-willed 29. Passionate. These good and valuable qualities can serve for a leader, such as for presiding over a work group, etc. However, it is always to be taken into account that it remains a fact that a choleric human being constantly gives free rein to his irascibility and rage, and thus loses all sense of decency. This is either because the choleric human being simply takes the right to do so, or the employees are effectively incapable and unable to defend themselves, and to bring the choleric angry manager to his senses. Interestingly, it is to be said that there are huge differences among cholerics, because not in every situation or environment, as well as not in every action, etc., do cholerics react equally quickly in a negative way in irritation. Unfortunately, many human beings behave tyrannically towards their fellow human beings, just as men or women behave tyrannically towards their partners, especially in many open and closed relationships and marriages, while they pretend to be peace-loving in their jobs because they want to keep them and not lose them, or because they are cowardly and playfully hide their true tyrannical nature, playing Liebmensch and infallible. But there is also the reverse, namely that at work choleric and unscrupulous self-expression takes place, but at home lamb-like behavior is cultivated, perhaps out of fear of one's partner or for other reasons. The choleric behavior of human beings is a characteristic of the personality, and moreover, is not gender-determined, for both men and women can be more or less addicted to choleric behavior. Very often, irascibility and feelings of inferiority are responsible for the choleric trigger, or otherwise an acute dissatisfaction, burnout, excessive demands, stress, etc. Unfortunately, overstraining of any kind is a particularly widespread problem that human beings are no longer able to cope with in the short term or even permanently. He is always entrusted with more major or minor tasks that he is no longer able to cope with. But what is excessive demand? This is based on a condition when the abilities, capacities, possibilities, and resources of a human being are no longer sufficient to master his situations in life and everyday life. As a result, problem-solving or overcoming a challenge becomes a factor that can no longer be managed. When human beings are overtaxed, they reach their limits and become incapable of providing the necessary services, whether these are cognitive, psychological, or also physical in nature, that is to say, overtaxing. The symptom of overstrain is overload, which can have similar meanings depending on the context, and which also creates psychological pressure, especially when goals are unattainable or expectations are set too high. Overload brings with it the feeling of having to accomplish more than life's energy and strength can provide. If the human being feels overtaxed, this is associated with a high degree of stress, which reacts immediately in the form of distress, which corresponds to negative stress, or in the form of eustress, which can be regarded as positive stress. Distress occurs as a great burden that brings with it the feeling and thoughts of not being able to cope with challenges that cannot be overcome despite the greatest effort. There is also simply a lack of the necessary time or skills. Negative stress is usually characterized by the attitude, "I can't do it anyway," because it is precisely this feeling and thought that creates the feeling of being overwhelmed and helpless. In contrast, eustress is motivating, which spurs the human being on to particularly good and valuable achievements. Consequently, he increases his attention and performance. He is intensively occupied and constantly has a lot to do. Consequently, he perceives the whole thing as pleasant and progressive, so he flies high during positive stress. So not all stress is the same. So on the one hand it can be equated with negative excessive demands, but also with positive high performance. So stress can be good and helpful when the human being feels a little stressed, which means that some human beings only achieve their best performance when they feel stressed. Stress only becomes harmful when it leads to emotional overload. That is, when short-term eustress turns into sustained and negative distress. Overstrain is often ignored by human beings, especially when they convince themselves that it is all just a short-lived feeling of sluggishness and the like, and do not want to admit to themselves that there is overstrain, and that the real reason is that expectations and challenges cannot be corresponded to. The fact that it is actually a weakness in the form of an excessive demand does not want to be acknowledged, which makes the problem even worse. In order to be able to really react correctly to an acute or threatening overload, human beings are urged to pay attention to the symptoms, which are very often signs of overload, and mainly the following. 1. Exhaustion, listlessness, flabbiness, tiredness, and frustration. 2. There is an increasing feeling of being under pressure. 3. Making mistakes increases, although efforts are made to the contrary. 4. The limits of performance become smaller and smaller. 5. The private life begins to suffer increasingly. 6. Emergence of anxiety regarding new tasks. 7. Grumpy reactions to everything and anything. Very often, excessive demands do not arise for no reason, and there is not always just one trigger, because often the cause is an interplay of several factors, such as tasks that pile up more and more, which means that there are more and more burdens that are supposed to be done, but which one can no longer cope with. The great time pressure, which is constantly growing, creates problems that quickly become the cause of excessive demands and no longer make it possible to switch off. The remaining energy reserves can no longer be replenished. Overstrain is also often a question of attitude, which is decisive for how the human being perceives and evaluates the situations and challenges that arise. If he is self-confident and assumes that the difficulties that arise can be overcome, then he is not overtaxed, but makes a conscious effort to overcome everything. If, on the other hand, he harbors helpless thoughts and acts accordingly, then the human being's attitude contributes to overburdening and overtaxing. In this case, he does not make life easy for himself, and does not admit to himself that he is failing, and that he is creating the cause for the overload because he lacks self-competence. As a result, the human being does not have the ability that his position needs and requires, because he has not developed sufficiently to be able to meet the demands of his position. For the human beings affected by excessive demands, everything has a great failing effect on the state of the psyche, whereby it must be explained that the so-called psyche does not exist and is not an organ of the body, but a forming and constantly changing state of feeling. For example, feeling good, feeling open-minded, feeling down, feeling bad, feeling agitated, feeling psychologically ill, etc., which results from the thoughts, feelings, demeanor, character traits and behaviors, etc. Often self-doubt arises in the human being, whereby he then wonders whether he is good or bad as a human being, whereby, however, the human beings around him often equally have some kind of problems, but face these indifferently and simply do not let anything show, and consequently it is assumed that similar challenges are apparently easily dealt with. This is despite the fact that frequent fears of failure and of the future create depressive states just as much as those who succumb to any kind of excessive demands, which in reality occur much more frequently in human beings than is assumed and apparent. Overstrain is indeed not uncommon, and is therefore not an individual fate, because the longer, the more human beings fall prey to the delusion that they cannot hold out and be soft. Every 26th human being even plays sick or simply freaks out in order to no longer have to fulfill expectations as valuable human beings. In other words, that a large part of humanity is overtaxed to live up to life in society, as well as their health in every respect, and in all the important demands. Overpopulation unfortunately means that everything and anything starts to go wrong faster and faster, including the emerging, and in the future disastrous artificial intelligence. There would be a lot more to say about this, but a final point must be made somewhere, because there is still something else to be explained about cholerics, namely, if the human being learns the characteristics and traits that are peculiar to a choleric human being, then he can adjust to them accordingly and deal with them in the correct way. Above all, it is important to ensure that the choleric human being is not put under pressure and is given his freedom, as well as not being specially controlled, because independence is highly valued in choleric people. Nevertheless, it is necessary to show a choleric human being that one has one's own limits, which he also has to respect and keep, just as it is also necessary not to shy away from a confrontation with the choleric person, but to be strictly careful not to appropriate the process of his behavior for oneself. A choleric human being likes to receive recognition for his achievements, which is why it should be granted to him, just as it should also be granted to every other and non-choleric human being. Furthermore, it is appropriate to trust and give responsibility to the choleric person as well, for he can be consistently task-oriented and responsible and a good leader. The choleric person can also have very good skills that can be trusted. It is appropriate in any case to give the choleric human being some understanding, especially when he is at 100 and somehow helpless and even powerless against it in his irascibility and rage, because deep in his memory, something is going on which he can neither elicit nor control. For this reason alone, it is necessary to offer him understanding and support to come down. In order to deal with a choleric human being in a correct way, it is very helpful to calm the human being down, because calming down always has a positive effect. A choleric human being can also get help, because there is also the so-called mindfulness and commitment therapy, which may be suitable for some choleric people to learn how to deal better with their temper and fits of rage. Those affected learn to recognize, perceive, and consciously counteract their feelings that trigger anger and temper, and to learn self-control. However, therapy can only be really effective for cholerics of both sexes if there is a conscious desire to work on oneself effectively and to change one's personal behavior. Trying to force this on the choleric person through a third party is, on the one hand, very exhausting and usually not successful. On the contrary, it is a reason for the choleric person to go berserk. There are medicines to counteract choleric aggressiveness, which often occurs, but these may only be prescribed after very precise medical clarification. However, these medicines only apply to individual cases and can only serve to calm the person down. What is also important to mention is that, as a rule, exceptions are also the rule. Cholerics consciously suffer from their attacks and want to help themselves, and there are also various methods of really helping oneself and being able to reduce the irascibility and outbursts of rage. 1. The first step to help oneself is the most important one, namely to take the path to self-knowledge, which means to build up sufficient self-reflection, that is to say, to question and analyze one's own thinking, feeling, and acting in order to recognize one's own problems and to change them for the better. However, this should be done without brooding, which uselessly robs energy. This is the only way to be able to classify one's own behavior. It is advisable to talk about this with other human beings, preferably with a designated reference person. 2. It is necessary to observe the outbursts of temper and the tantrums closely, and to determine how they manifest themselves and in which situations, whereby it is also important to determine how they differ when they occur. Notes can be made on this to memorize anything that may be helpful in consciously counteracting a choleric episode and avoiding or preventing a correspondingly embarrassing situation. 3. If active stress occurs, then it should be considered which method should be used and is suitable to reduce it. A lot of exercise and walking and breathing fresh air can help, as well as meditation or breathing exercises can actively and effectively help to reduce negative feelings and stress, which can prevent a fit of temper and a tantrum from occurring in the first place. 4. Finally, it should be said that psychotherapy can be useful and helpful if a really competent psychologically trained psychotherapist can be found to help. But this is not easy, because really knowledgeable persons of this profession are rare. Only special methods of behavioral therapy are effective and suitable for necessarily learning to deal better with personal emotions. This is actually what I have to say or explain regarding cholerism and what Svath taught me when I was a boy in the 1940s, not knowing that I would one day talk about it. My memory is not the best now, but what I learnt from Svath in this regard is what I have remembered ever since, because it helped me a lot myself and saved me from a lot. This also from vindictiveness and retaliation, as I was and still am harassed elsewhere by human beings for sectarian reasons, because I have been opposed to any religious or secular belief since my adolescence.
I am aware of that, but it is amazing to me that you still remember so much of what Svath taught you.
I guess that is nothing special, because I think that if you keep revisiting what you once learnt, then it just sticks in your mind, and somehow becomes a habit as well.
That is indeed the case. But now, as Ptaah has insistently instructed me, I am to clarify a few things openly, namely with regard to all the various flying apparatuses of the foreigners that have been sighted worldwide, but so far could only be photographed in an unclear process. This is in contrast to our Pleiarans beam ships, as you have always called them, which you were able to capture very clearly and recognizably on films and slides when you worked together with Simyase on behalf of our body and took the photographs. These are therefore, as you once said, hair-sharp photographs of Ptaah and I's beamships, in contrast to the diffuse photographically recorded objects of appearance, that is to say, flying objects of the foreigners. These only show very unclear, blurred, and therefore not exactly recognizable objects on photographs. Your photographs, however, should be good, clear, and sharp, which is why you explicitly had to take the photographs together with simya-se. The beamships, as we use them in the atmosphere, can also be used in free space and are of different sizes, whereby the smallest are calculated for a person and correspond to reconnaissance devices. This while we also use other constructions of completely different shapes, appearance, and sizes, which you know about. The one construction that was intended for your slide and film recordings, and that was used by simya-se, has 6 other similar flying apparatuses of different sizes. Totally different constructions and absolutely different shapes, types, and sizes are aligned and destined for other uses, the largest of our such objects measuring over 2,100 meters by earthly measurements and being created in Era orbit. Also on Era itself, the large flying objects are produced and afterwards brought into the wide free space outside the planet, because the weightlessness technology and the propulsion of the flying object makes this absolutely possible.
Excuse me, please. It is perhaps important to mention that this propulsion, as you call the purposeful activity of moving the object, that is to say the large beamship, is also designed as an interstellar drive. The necessary energy, radiating far, generates which has nothing to do with anti-gravity, as the Earthlings know this, or imagine it futuristically and fancifully. The whole thing has nothing to do, not even the slightest thing to do with what really is concerning thee, and is based solely on the which, what effective. At any rate, this is what Svath explained to me at the time I have not forgotten in the middle of the 1940s.
That is indeed so, and that he explained all this to you at your young age, and that you were not only very interested in it, but also understood the explanations, I know from his annals. But you should not tell anyone about all this, for it would not be good if this knowledge were to become part of the knowledge of today's researchers and designers of propulsion technologies, for it would very quickly lead to a catastrophe that would cause even more harm throughout the earth than that which has already been caused by technical achievements, and which will become even worse. It is therefore up to you to conceal your knowledge and not speak openly about it.
It's all good. So I will just dot the I's and cross the T's where I've carelessly said too much. It is sometimes the case that I simply forget that I will call up the conversation later and write it down. It is just the heat of the moment, as we say. But you can go on talking about what you have to say.
Good. Then I also have the following to say. We too, like the foreigners, have small and very small objects which we use for reconnaissance tasks, but ours are not in spherical form, as these are often used by the foreigners as observation and reconnaissance objects in various sizes and light-emitting. And what I have to emphasize expressly, as Ptaah wishes, relates to us the fact that there is no relevance whatsoever between the foreigners and us Pleiadians, for we have always kept ourselves absolutely concealed from them, in such a way that they are neither able to see, hear, nor locate us. In addition, we Pleiadians, as well as our federates as a whole, are not at home in this time structure, and thus not in this universe of creation, but are displaced in space, that is to say dimension and time, in another of the 7 universes of creation. This, as well as others from our line, who however come from a universe, that is to say dimensional structure of the twin sister creation, come here to Earth, as do we Pleiadians, because you work here with regard to the teaching that leads back to Nocademian, and which is also taught with us, and through which our peoples became peaceful, and in this process sociable with each other. But if you are no more, then we will all withdraw for good, so that after 25 million years, when our distant ancestors found the passage anomaly to this space-time continuum and came here, We will then leave this universe space, that is to say, the dimensional structure of creation. I still have to explain that our appearance here was based on the prediction that our distant ancestors saw more than 25 million years ago, that in the future, the teaching of Nocedemian would be spread on this planet Earth, which is why also already at that time, the anomaly of the passage from our universe into this one was used to move here. However, always and throughout the entire duration, from then until now, we remained strictly bound by the time of our distant ancestors and their descendants, and so also we ourselves, to what was decided. For this was the word that no interference in earthly affairs would ever take place without an official alliance with some authoritative earthly might of this earth planet. An attempt of this kind to make a corresponding treaty was made through you with America, but unfulfillable demands were made which were completely unacceptable. Consequently, our peoples, via the body, withdrew from the request for a treaty alliance. This was also connected with the fact that if everything had come about with America, Russia would have been included next, and then all the states of the earth. However, the unfulfillable demands of the American leadership caused the project to collapse before it could begin. So what we envisaged to create peace on earth between all peoples could not come about, because America's hegemonic behavior not only runs counter to all reason, but also to everything of righteousness, freedom, tolerance, esteem, reliability, responsibility, and the possibility of a basis of trust. America lacks respect for the independence of every state. Consequently, everyone wants to be ruled by America, which also wanted to be extended to us when we asked to establish a union. After our unsuccessful efforts, we investigated the then state leadership of the USSR, but we fathomed everything in the same way as with America, and had to recognize that the human beings of the earth are still very far from clear understanding, from any reason in the will for peace. This has also proved to be the case with earth humans in general, which means that we must not only speak of those responsible for the state, for as we had to recognize, the majority of the entire earth's humanity tends towards power, revenge, and killing as soon as something comes up. Only a small part of the whole of Earth humanity is free from these ambitions, for as we have clearly discovered, this striving is deeply anchored in the bulk of Earth humans. And this is also a great danger for the foreigners who, in order to get hold of them, are not only attacked with weapons, but also become hostile, that which, however, you should not call openly. The W is or else will. But all this you must not name when you call up the conversation, therefore it will be necessary for you to.
That's where I will just put dots.
That will be good. But the following is also to be said, which is just as desired by Ptaah as all that I have said so far. Our ancestors were never involved in bringing any religions to earth, just as no buildings etc. were created by them, as the earlier foreigners did on the other hand, and elevated themselves above Earth's humanity. But the foreigners were never so stupid as to supply Earth humans with weapons, as the stupid leaders of many states have been doing for some time now, with the help of equally stupid sections of the population, with regard to the Ukraine, and have thereby provoked, are leading, and are continuing to maintain a world war of a special kind. As a result, Putin, as the Russian leader, was all the more encouraged, as the secret government of America expected, to let this strange and peculiar world war get out of hand. Just as the simple-minded majority of Earth humans, in their stupidity, do not make any valuable achievements of their own, but are enthusiastic about football and other sports. Instead of striving for and making valuable achievements of their own, they live along stupidly, naively, and religiously delusional, and do not notice that they are getting closer and closer to ruin. The majority of Earth humans of all states is so stupid and incapable that it often places completely incompetent persons at the head of their states, just as it thereby also entitles the perpetrators of war in any form to wage war, instead of putting such persons on trial and condemning them in such a way that they are brought to a place where they can no longer exercise leadership power for the rest of their lives. It is.
Seclusion from public life for life would properly be the just punishment.
It would be, yet that is not done.
There are many things being done wrong here on Earth, also concerning the so-called important space technology, which is based on rocket propulsion research. With that, precisely with rocket propulsion, the heads only get into Earth orbit, but not out into space, which begins very far outside the solar system. Moreover, earthly research is still very far from what is needed to fly through space, and also not with anti-gravity propulsion, because that is of no use in space either, because there is nothing there that anti-gravity could repel. The fact that the foreigners do not whiz around in earthly airspace with anti-gravity propulsion, but does not make sense to those who should actually think a little further than those who do not understand anything at all about locomotion technology in airspace and in the void of space. Also, when I observe the ridiculous and dangerous efforts that are being made to capture the foreigners, I have to grab my head and ask myself how stupid and dumb one must actually be to believe that contact with the foreigners could be established by firing at them. The whole thing is a hostility without equal, and brings about exactly the opposite of what should be expected. So the whole thing is a completely wrong attitude and approach, which brings more harm than success, as is unfortunately usual with the Earthling. But he will experience that sooner or later. But I have something else. There were Americans here as, these have made films and photos, and that which not only reveals the stupidity in stupidity, but what do you say to that? For my part, I think it doesn't get any more stupid and obvious than that.
We should not talk about this openly, because the whole thing would only bring trouble and disadvantages for you and the whole figu. Therefore, it is necessary that you keep quiet about it, and also the Americans concerned. It would really not be good if you or those who that let it go with that.
That's what I was thinking just now, and I also told Bernadette. It is just, I think, because...
Yes, indeed it is, and it would only bring mischief and harm because...
We on Earth lack just about everything, such as openness, financial security, creativity, perfection and optimism, professionalism, happiness, family orientation and privacy, good success, compassion, kindness, perseverance, spontaneity, trust, humility, health, faithfulness, real and unaffected fun, true honesty, love and accuracy.
You see that correctly? But now I still have to discuss this with you, which you should not then retrieve and write down, because it is.